Namaste, Fist Pump. Angus here. Today's video is a follow-up to yesterday's video, which is how to do fasting with lumen. And this is how not to do fasting with lumen, and kind of some fasting warnings. I'm not an anti-fasting person. I think fasting is a wonderful tool, but I think people just hang too much on it. And then when you've got some dude like Thomas DeLauer, who's absolutely jacked and in phenomenal shape and has amazing aerobic capacity, is telling you to do fasting, remember that's his reality. And then when you got someone like all the kind of anti-carb doctors telling you that fasting is awesome, remember that's from their perspective. And if you're dealing with a client that's 100-pound overweight, pretty much any calorie reduction intervention will be helpful, and possibly fasting, because it just lowers blood sugar and does everything, might be super duper beneficial. But remember, even on a low carb diet, you can develop insulin resistance if your cortisol is too high, because cortisol will break down your muscle tissue and boost your blood sugar up. That's one of cortisol's main jobs. So I'm going to pop up some screenshots. So lumen, if you don't know what lumen is, it works in this thing called RER. And sorry if I keep looking over here, it's just because I'm looking at the screenshot of it. So RER, what RER is your respiratory exchange ratio. And your respiratory exchange ratio is just how much fat and carbohydrates you're breathing out. So when you metabolize fat and carbohydrates, you extract the calorie from that, and that becomes energy, becomes movement, becomes action. And then when you breathe out the used carbon, and you can actually capture that carbon and measure it. So you normally need a big thing called the metabolic cart, which is fancy in a lab, and will cost you about maybe £100 just to get a session done. So in that respect, lumen's the only thing on the market that measures this. So you can do loads of fun experiments with lumen. Lumen simplifies this chart of this, like 1.00 is 100% carbs, and then 0.70 is fat, and then all the ranges in between. Lumen just puts it into this range of 1 to 5, 1 being fat burn, 5 being carb burn, 3 being kind of 50-50, and then all the ranges in between that. So if we quickly just understand our, sorry if I keep clicking on this, just sorting this out. So if we look at this, I'll do a full screen on this one. So you got time, you got your natural rhythm. So that's nighttime moving into dawn, then you got your day, and then that's moving into dusk, and then nighttime, and then underneath that says lifestyle. So it's got awakening, so you get waken at dawn, and then you got your day, and then you go to sleep after the sun goes down. And this goes in with your hormones, cortisol and melatonin. So melatonin rises and reaches its peak when you wake, and then it slowly goes down over the day. And as it kind of goes down, it crosses over with melatonin. Melatonin rises, and melatonin's high at night, and then dips down as cortisol shoots up. Those hormones are kind of antagonists to each other. They have a different thing. So if you don't eat, you're going to keep that cortisol higher for longer. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's the dose makes the poison. So if you're handling that okay, on your lumen, you should be getting 1s and 2s during your fast. If that converts from, if you start the morning at a 1 or 2, but then by the end of your fast, you're getting 3s, 4s, you are now, cortisol is too high, and your body is now breaking down a lot of muscle tissue really quickly to produce carbohydrates. The other thing that could be happening is you could be entering into ketosis. So when you enter into ketosis, you burn ketones, and they burn faster than a normal fat. So your fat becomes ketones, and the ketones are denser sort of carbohydrate molecules. So it will give a false reading on the lumen saying that you're burning carbs when you're in fact burning ketones. Lumen isn't keto. I made a video on this before. So if you're wanting to do keto or ketogenesis, or you want to go into keto diet for whatever reason, then lumen isn't the device for you. Lumen is about predicting your normal fat burning, which you normally do. So a lot of people need to know this. You burn fat all day long. You do not need to be in ketosis to burn fat. I know, blows people's minds. So let's quickly look at the effects of excess cortisol in the body, and we've got to underline that excess. So we've got hunger, hostility, acid reflux, tunnel vision, migraine, sleep deprivation, chronic fatigue, hypertension, depression, decreased metabolism. So decreased metabolism is really funny, because people will say like, oh, but fasting improves your metabolism. But what's really happening is you're reducing calories, therefore losing weight. So you think your metabolism is speeded up. And all you've done is reduce a meal from your body. And what it can do long term is actually destroy your metabolism. Unless you're using something like lumen to make sure you're in that fat burning mode, then you're not causing that stress, and you're handling your fast. So it depends what other stress factors you have in your life. So to illustrate my point a little bit more about fasting too long. So I'm not saying fasting, we'll hit that 12-hour mark and then we can start making choices every hour whether we're going to start eating or not. So if we look at this study, so this study was done on alternative day fasting, which is one day where you don't eat and one day that you do eat. So it was split into three groups. You got the 75-75 group, which is the first one there. So they were on a calorie deficit of 25% of their calories. They had 75% of the calories on day one, and on day two, they had 75% of the calories, and then so on and so forth, like that. The next group ate 0 on day one, but then ate 150. So same total amount of calories as group one, but they just ate all their calories one day, and then the next day they go 0, then 150, 0, 150, and so on. Then they had a control group that just did alternative day fasting, but they ate the full amount of calories. So 0 one day and 200% of their calories the next day, and then 0 and then 200%. If we just cover that group really quickly, they lost fat mass, they lost lean mass, which is fat-free mass, and they lost fat mass, just a little bit of fat mass, and they lost a lot of fat-free mass. That fat-free mass could be water weight, it could be other things, but because they're fasting the whole day, their body's going to break down muscle tissue at a faster rate than you can make muscle tissue. That is really important to know. So if we look at the 75-75, that's just the straight up calorie deficit group of 25% calories. They only lost a little bit, tiny little bit of fat-free mass, which is lean mass, and they lost a massive chunk. They lost the most weight overall, and they lost a massive chunk of fat loss. So fat loss is your goal. Remember, just getting a normal calorie deficit will help. And maybe a 16-8 fast or a 14-hour fast may help you have a smaller, if you have an 8-hour feeding window or a 10-hour feeding window, then you have less time to get those 75 calories in, so it makes that sort of slightly easier rather than having 12 hours to get 100% in. You kind of reduce the time. So the alternative day fasting group lost about 50% of their weight from fat-free mass, which is lean mass. That is horrific. And if you do that day after day after day after day after day, and you do this for a year, you are going to be noticeably skinnier fat. You're going to be less muscle, a little bit less fat. You're going to be weaker. Your metabolic rate's going to be an absolute toilet. That's a horrific thing to do. But what I would say is, if you're using lumen, and lumen says that you're in a 1, so you do this whole day of fasting, and you're a 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and all the way up until you go to bed, and you wake up the next morning and you're a 1, it works for you. If you're not, it's not working for you. The other problem with this, people will say, oh, but ketosis protects your lean mass. It takes longer than 1 day to get into true ketosis, that protective kind of nutritional ketosis that's protective for your lean mass. So the first couple of days, you're going to be chewing through your lean mass. Also, if the body wants carbohydrates, it will create carbohydrates. So stress can kick you out of ketosis. So this is how not to do a fast with lumen. If you start seeing those carb burning numbers and you haven't eaten any carbs and you've been fasting for a long while, come up your fast no matter what your guru told you. You now have a device, so it doesn't matter what Dr. So-and-so said or jacked internet dude said. You have a device that tells you what's happening in your body, so you no longer need to be dictated to by the gurus. Anyway, signing off. I'll check you on the next one. Hit like and subscribe if you like these videos, and let me know in a comment below. See you there.